Welcome everyone to this year's Supporters Celebration. Last year, I warned you that things would be different when we met again, believing that I was referring to how we would be enjoying lunch in our temporary dining facilities on the quad instead of our beautiful dining hall. Well, the temporary accommodation is certainly there, but we are not. I'm speaking to you instead from our beautiful library, a place many of you will remember fondly, and yet which remains a poor substitute for being together. However, these new online methods of working and socialising do offer us some consolations. Who would have thought, for example, that we could experience the delights of gastrophysics from our own living rooms with Professor Charles Spence joining us from Colombia? Of course, it might seem odd for me to call anything a celebration in these dark times, but your support is and remains worthy of celebration. You are all phenomenal, both in your generosity and in your loyalty to this college. Your support over the past year has helped carry Somerville through an extremely difficult period. And I'm not just talking about financial support, far from it. You've been there for us, cheering on our efforts to keep going, stepping in just at the right moment with new ideas and energy, thinking about the needs of our students and the well-being of our college, and always making sure that we do the right thing and honour our traditions. It is those traditions, that pioneering ethos of inclusivity and intellect, that inspire our students to go out into the world after their studies, knowing the value of scholarship, determined to make a difference and with the resilience to weather the storms of life. But it is your support that enables us to vouchsafe those cornerstones of the Somervillian philosophy for current and future generations. It is your support that made our Dorothy Hodgkin Fellowship a reality, with our inaugural fellow, Dr. Faye Probert, already out there, championing the cause for women in scientific research, just as Dorothy Hodgkin did herself. It is your support for the Somerville Sanctuary Scholarship that brought Marwa Biala, formerly a radiologist in the war-torn city of Tripoli, to Somerville to study radiation biology as our inaugural Somerville Sanctuary Scholar, and which will, we hope, allow us to award a scholarship to a young person who arrived in this country as an unaccompanied minor, yet will begin a degree at Oxford. Quite extraordinary. Such life-changing opportunities deliver on our earliest founding promise to offer a world-class education to the most able students, irrespective of state or circumstance. Meeting as we do a few days after Holocaust Memorial Day, with the theme, "To be the light in the darkness," they are also a reminder of the days when Somerville shared its light with students and academics fleeing persecution in Nazi Germany. Finally, it is your magnificent support for our COVID Hardship Fund that has enabled us to help our students and early career academics through the worst days of this crisis. At a time of great insecurity and anxiety for you and your families, your thoughts with our students and the problems that they were facing. Thank you. It's quite simple. We can never thank our volunteers, our supporters, or our extraordinary development board as much as you deserve, and nor will we let that stop us from trying. However, it's our students who are best placed to tell you about the impact which COVID-19 has had on their lives and how your support helped them overcome those challenges. So I will turn now to our wonderful JCR President, Fabio. He will speak to you about what has been happening in college over the past year. Fabio.
The last 10 months have been immensely challenging for everybody, everywhere. And for students at Somerville, that's been no different. We're social creatures, and so not being able to hug our friends after a long, hard day work for fear of spreading a virus has really taken its toll on our college community. Trying to write down an equation on an online whiteboard, or realising you've muted yourself halfway through your argument in a tutorial, have all become part and parcel of this new, more challenging reality that we've all had to adapt to in the last 8 months. However, something that's amazed me is the continued resilience and fortitude of all our students. Resilience for me is a mental state, an attitude, but it's incredibly tightly linked to the resources and support that students have access to. As a college community, we've really come together to support each other and help out those around us who may be struggling. Nowhere is that more obvious in the support we received from you, our donors. Whilst you may not physically be with us in college, the pandemic and social distancing has brought to life this simple truism that community isn't about physical proximity. Community is founded in acts of generosity, loyalty, and support, all of which you epitomise. As a student body and their representative, we're so incredibly grateful for all your acts of kindness that have meant students have the resources they need to thrive, both academically and personally.
Before coming to Oxford, a lot of students have this fear about whether they'll fit in at this university. Will I have the right resources? Will I get the same level of support? Will I be able to develop my passions? And I say this because I had these exact questions before applying to university last year. After spending my first few weeks at Oxford, I became accustomed to virtual learning like most of my peers, despite its many challenges. So I'm a biochemist, and as you can probably imagine, trying to draw these tiny hexagonal molecules with a mouse is not the easiest. So when I first heard about the IT bursary and the COVID hardship fund, I jumped on the idea of getting myself a graphics tablet. Now, this not only helped me to draw these molecular structures with better accuracy, but it also allowed me to complete my problem sheets with better efficiency. I know firsthand that a table lamp or a laptop stand or a keyboard can make a massive impact to students. And so we're incredibly grateful and privileged to have these sorts of funds available to us. In addition to all of this, the Sports and Wellbeing Scholarship allows students to develop their passions outside of academia. For us, scholarships aren't just about the money. It's about the support. It's about feeling valued. It's about having a better learning experience. And so on behalf of the whole student body, we just wanted to say a great big thank you to our donors for their incredible generosity.
As you can tell, your support has made a huge difference. You have sustained us through the darkest days when the challenges were great, yet thanks to your support, never felt insurmountable. You have helped us to unlock possibilities for our students as they prepare for their futures. And in doing so, you have unlocked their potential to shape our future. You have freed us to contemplate new ventures like our new RISE campaign, which will spearhead our commitment over the next 5 years to equip our students, our academics, and our college with the resources to meet the challenges of the future. Each letter in that word RISE represents a pillar upon which we will build the future of this college. We will do it through resilience, inclusivity, sustainability, and excellence, and we will do it together. All this talk of rising up brings to mind the inauguration that happened less than a month ago, when the stunning young poet laureate Amanda Gorman read her poem, The Hill We Climb, which ends with these lines: "When the day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." Thank you for making us brave enough to see the light and to be a light for ourselves and for others. I would now like to hand over to our main event. I'm thrilled that Somerville's very own Professor Charles Spence is able to join us today, all the way from Colombia. Charles is the head of Oxford University's Cross-Modal Research Lab, where he studies how our brains process information from our senses, particularly in relation to food. He has worked with Michelin-starred chefs, multinational companies, and even the European Space Shuttle programme, and today he will give us an introduction to what he terms gastrophysics and how all our senses affect the experience of flavour. I do hope you enjoy it. If you'd like to ask a question at any point during the presentation, Charles will be joining us in the chat function, so just ask away. Thank you again for all your support and for joining us today.
So, thank you, Jan, for the kind words of introduction. This is Professor Charles Spence, head of the Cross-Modal Research Laboratory at Oxford University and fellow in experimental psychology at Somerville College. And I would like to share with you at the supporters virtual lunch some of the research and ideas that have emerged from the world of gastrophysics. It's the new science of eating that we have been working on for the last decade or two now in the lab in the psychology department, but also with collaborators around the world, to include everyone from world-leading chefs to mixologists, baristas, cocktail makers, food and beverage companies, and beyond. Now, this approach to gastrophysics is one that really represents a combination of gastronomy on the one hand, this kind of a study of nice food, delicious food, in contrast to all the other food scientists out there who study the more everyday foods of life. How much fish meal you can feed to a chicken before you can taste it on the breast meat is a scientific question around food. But we set our sights a little differently, thinking about the really nice food, just food like the dish you can see here on the screen. From Kitchen Theory, from chef Joseph Youssef, a London-based chef who we work very closely with, who until COVID had a gastrophysics chef's table. And this dish you can see is beautiful to look at, called Pollen and the Bee. And it is both tasty, both beautiful, but also with a sort of a health message in there around nudging us towards alternate foods and doing it through the vehicle of kind of transition insects, if you will, bee products that we already consume, as a stepping stone to get us towards eating other insects that currently, as yet, we do not eat. Especially not in Somerville College in Oxford, although, as I'll show at the end, there are some insects that we find here in Colombia, where I am currently on sabbatical, that may offer us a way forward to a more sustainable delivery of protein in terms of future food. Now, we study gastronomy with the chefs, with the baristas, with the mixologists, with the food and beverage companies and the food providers. And we study it through the lens of psychology, or in particular psychophysics. That's the physics part of gastrophysics, a branch of psychology. We systematically study people's perception and their response to carefully calibrated stimuli. And we sometimes do that in the lab, more often than not on a computer, where it's easy to study. But in the bottom of the screen, you can hopefully see the subject in a lab experiment where we're interested in studying the impact of the wine glass on the perception of the wine. Studying it scientifically in the lab, we have blindfolded our participant. We've clamped their head still. We're agitating the wine glass on a stand. This is very scientific. It is gastrophysics, but this person is not enjoying that glass of wine. So it's kind of ecologically invalid. So we do some experiments in the science lab using psychophysics, but at the same time we try and repeat our findings where we can in restaurants, in dining halls like at Somerville, in food festivals, music festivals, book festivals, you name it, wherever we can get consumers in the real world to try some food and rate their experience of it. And if we can show that the same rules apply in the laboratory as in the real world, then we think we're onto something in terms of the factors that affect the way we experience and think about food. Now, in the next slide here, you can see some Asian consumers who are clearly, from their facial expressions at least, not enjoying whatever it is that happens to be on their slice of bread. It looks like Nutella, something chocolatey and sweet. But in this case, these consumers have been misled by their eyes, and they're all pulling what has come to be known as the Marmite face. This sort of savoury, salty, umami-ish, kumi-ish perhaps, tasting food that is not to everyone's tastes, you love it or hate it. And in this case, these individuals were expecting one thing, I think, expecting something sweet. They got something savoury instead. And this leads to a disconfirmation of expectation response. They do not like the food then, as their facial expressions show, and nor will they like the food if it is served thereafter. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, this is precisely the face, the Marmite face, that the diners in the soon-to-be world's top restaurant pulled when world famous chef Heston Blumenthal, who's been coming to the lab in Oxford for a number of years now, tried serving this dish to the diners, to the lucky diners who are regulars at the Fat Duck, again, when it was open pre-COVID. And the chef had made this new dish, was thinking about putting it on the menu. It tasted beautiful, perfectly seasoned to what was soon to be the world's #1 chef. But when he served it to his diners, his regulars in his restaurant, when they tasted it, they went, ugh! They pulled a Marmite face. I think there's something very interesting going on here. How can it be that a dish that the world's best taste buds, in a sense, the world's best chef, thinks is perfectly seasoned, his diners do not? And the answer is it's all about what's going on in the mind of the taster and not just in the mouth of the taster. And that is what differs between the chef and his guests on this occasion. Because when we see a dish like this, our brains have sort of evolved to predict, to compute the energy content, taste and flavour, fat content of foods and things that we might be tempted to eat in the environment around us. Now in this case, as soon as this image went up on the screen, the pinkish red ice cream, it looked sweet to most of us. Our brains would think probably raspberry, maybe strawberry ice cream, something that we would probably like the taste of, but maybe think is not so healthy. And all those thoughts went through our mind. But in this case, our eyes and the eyes of the diners in the Fat Duck restaurant misled them, because this is really a historic savoury ice. It could be frozen crab bisque, or it could be smoked salmon ice cream. The colour is perfect, the colour is natural, but the colour is not one we currently associate with savoury ice creams. So in this case, the diners did not like the ice creams. They were expecting a sweet taste, they got a savoury taste. Instead, they pull the Marmite face. They do not enjoy the food at the moment, nor do they enjoy it thereafter. The solution in this case, from research done by the chef together with psychologists at the University of Sussex, Martin Yeomans, a colleague of mine, and published in 2008, was to show that if you give this dish the right name before you serve it to the guests, if you call it Food 398, or you say this is a historic savoury ice cream, then when people taste the dish for the first time, they enjoy the taste much more. They think it's perfectly seasoned, and they are more likely to consume the food thereafter. So the point is, we need to think carefully about what's going on in the mind of the taster in order to optimize the experience in the mouth. And while a lot of our work has been done with chefs like Heston Blumenthal and formerly Ferran Adrià Bulli in Spain, another world's top chef, there's a temptation to think, well, what goes on there is kind of irrelevant. It's esoteric, it's an expensive place to go to, it's exclusive, and most of us probably can't get a booking there even if we tried. So who cares what the top chefs serve and what they call their dishes if we are never going to taste them? Well, my feeling is that a lot of the insights that come from some of the world's top chefs, from some of the almost the Formula One of the kitchen, if you will, where innovation happens much more quickly, in my experience, is that some of the insights there can then pass on to the mainstream of food. And what the savoury smoked salmon ice cream example shows is the power of naming to change our response to food. And that is something that affects all of us, I think. And my favourite example of that from the mainstream is this Patagonian toothfish, a ugly monster of the deep. It's been on restaurant menus in the UK for decades, and yet no one really was tempted to order it. If I were to show you a picture of this healthy, sustainable, nutritious monster of the deep, I think few people would be convinced to order it either. Patagonian toothfish just doesn't sound very appealing. Most of us would have chosen a steak or something else instead. But when a few years ago some bright spark came up with the name Chilean sea bass, suddenly sales of this healthy, sustainable, nutritious and tasty monster of the deep increased by about 1,200% in the UK, in Australia, in North America and beyond. So I think the message is that the names we give to the foods we eat do play an important role, both at the very high end of molecular modernist cuisine, but also in the mainstream. And that if we want to nudge people towards eating different kinds of foods, we should think carefully about what to call them. Now, of course, when you get home tonight and thinking about making your lunch or your dinner and what you should give the name, that's probably a good thing to do, to think carefully about the names we give to the foods that we give to other people. You probably won't get a 1200% increase in liking from your dinner guests, but nevertheless, I think every little can help. And it's why I'm sort of especially interested in the debate that's been going on over the last few years around what to call vegetarian burgers and sausages. And I think this was ultimately voted down, but there was a suggestion that it was just wrong to call vegetarian burgers burgers and vegetarian sausages sausages, but instead they ought to be called vegetarian discs and tubes. The food doesn't change, it's just a matter of naming, and yet I think from all the evidence I've seen that difference in naming could have a profound effect on the likely uptake of vegetarian protein, kind of meat type products. And hence perhaps we should be happy that we can continue to call our vegetarian burgers burgers for the foreseeable future, if that is the path we hope others will follow in terms of reducing their consumption of animal protein. Now, while these examples of the power of naming have been evidenced through scientific research, it's something that doesn't really, I think, agree with our intuitions. Most of us feel like we can just taste food in our mouth, and something like the naming or the colour of the food, the environment in which we happen to be tasting, wouldn't really affect us. And yet at the same time, I think we all have within us the experience of what has come to be known as a Provençal rosé paradox, whereby when we go on holiday to the Mediterranean, say, and we have that glass of rosé wine, it tastes wonderful, so delicious in fact that we're tempted to buy a bottle or case and bring it back home to share with our friends and family on a cold winter's evening. And yet when we do that and we open the bottle at home, it rarely tastes the same. It tastes disappointing. This is the Provençal rosé paradox. How can you taste the same wine in different places and yet think such different things about it? I think the answer is, again, that our experience of taste is really influenced by our mood, by our emotion, and by the context, much more than any of us realise. And the fact that we've all had a version of the Provençal rosé experience is enough to say, yep, we all understand really how powerful external influences can be. And these are the kinds of influences I'm very interested in studying with the chefs, the food companies, and so on. Now, who you see here is Swiss chef Denis Martin from his namesake restaurant, Denis Martin, 2 Michelin star restaurant near Nestlé headquarters in Switzerland. And he's realised that he gets many what he calls suits on account in his restaurant. They're not people who are not paying for dinner, buttoned up, stiff, formal, Swiss, is his words for his compatriots. And he sort of could tell that when they walked through the door, if they had a face like that, they weren't going to enjoy the food as much as he thought that they should, given his effort in sourcing, presentation, preparation, and so on. And so in a great kind of intuitive act, this chef placed one of these centre stage on each and every table in his restaurant in Vevey in Switzerland. It's a single sitting of about 30 covers, last time I went, and everyone arrives about 7 o'clock. There's no cutlery, no glassware, nothing on the tables, just one of these cows. And once the last guest has arrived, people start getting curious. What's happening? Where is our first dish? Look, we're all here now. And eventually somebody will pick up this cow, curious as to whether it might be a salt and pepper shaker, or which one is it? Grinder, Swiss style. And when they pick that up, they will hear the sound of the moo of the cow. And then they'll laugh, they'll be surprised. That's not what you expect to find at a fancy Michelin-starred Swiss restaurant. And yet this is a beautiful example of a mental palate cleanser, because as soon as you start to realise that the pleasures of the table reside mainly in the mind, not the mouth, then you want to get your mind ready for eating and forget about those acidic sorbets that were traditional restaurants would have you eat to clean your palate. To me and to many of the colleagues I work with, the mouth, the tongue, is in fact one of the least interesting parts about how we experience flavour and why we enjoy what we do. The other part of the Provençal rosé paradox, I think, is the effect of context on us, not just our mood. Because when we're on holiday in the Mediterranean, we're likely to be in a good mood with our friends and family, relaxed. And we've all had the experience that if you're fighting with your partner or family, you just can't enjoy the meal, no matter how fancy the restaurant. So our mood and our emotion affect our taste. Our state of relaxation or stress affects the taste and enjoyment. That's what partly explains the Provençal experience. The other part is the context. If you're by the sea, au bord de la mer, you'll have the sounds of the seagulls, the waves crashing on the beach perhaps, the warmth on your back and so on. The smell of the salty sea air, and all of that is actually influences our tasting experience much more than any of us realise. And it was that insight that led, together with Chef Heston Blumenthal you see here, to the Sound of the Sea seafood dish, which has been the signature dish at the Fat Duck restaurant in Bray, 3 Michelin star restaurant, formerly world's best, pretty close to Oxford for the last decade or so. A dish that comes to the table, you can see it there looking like the seashore with sand and foam, seaweed and some sashimi. And on the other hand, the waiter brings a conch shell out of which emerges some earbuds. And when the diners put those earbuds in, they hear what you are hearing now, the sounds of the sea, waves crashing on the beach, some seagulls squawking overhead. And we've done the research together with Heston in Oxford, at Science Oxford, when it used to be at the bottom of Headington Hill, showing that people rate oysters as tasting significantly better, but no more salty when listening to the sounds of the sea. This dish, I think, also works, and part of the reason why it's been on the menu for a decade, and the signature dish for a decade now, or more, is that when you put the earbuds in, diners stop talking. And so for a course, their attention is focused on what they're eating, and that makes food taste much better than if we're distracted by our mobile device or the conversation at table. But what's also interesting to me is how many diners who've had this dish, whose memory it sticks in, say spontaneously, as well as journalists writing in print, that they were brought to tears by this dish. Something that rarely happens when we eat seafood, and yet something about this dish seems to bring many people to tears. It's also one of the first examples of technology at table, and something that's we're very interested in here at Oxford at the Cross-Modal Research Laboratory. Now, this idea of technology at table, this idea of listening to the sounds of the sea, is one that has gone global in the years since the Sound of the Sea dish was introduced at the Fat Duck restaurant, based on some of the research we conducted with the chef in Oxford back in 2006 or 7, I forget which year now. Here we see French chef Paul Poiret of Ultraviolet in Shanghai. And it's a 20-course tasting menu you get. You can see there in the middle of each plate, just a tiny morsel. That's one of your 20 courses. And this is a dish inspired by fish and chips. It's actually a stuffed caperberry, but this dish is inspired by the chef's time when he was in England, and he uses the technology to tell stories about the dishes he serves. And he used to be a very unfamous chef in London, and then one day he went to order some fish and chips, and when he unwrapped the paper, and that tells you how many years ago it was, he saw his own picture in the local newspaper, and that was for him the moment when he thought he might one day be famous. And when he serves this dish, this fish and chips inspired dish in his restaurant in Shanghai at $900 a head, he serves it with the sounds of the sea, followed up by the sounds, quintessential sounds of the UK, you might say, the sounds of the Beatles, and he projects the British weather, not the Colombian weather, the British weather on the walls of the restaurant, all designed to enhance the experience of that food, make it more memorable and trigger nostalgia and emotion. Now, those of you who are watching today, I'll be fortunate enough to hear the Somerville Choir, who have recorded, especially for you, a version of a song called Fish and Chips. And hence, while none of us can get to ultraviolet at the present time, any one of us can probably enhance the taste of our seafood, and if we're lucky enough, fish and chips, by listening to the sound of the choir. That will be a performance that will appear at the end of this presentation. In our own work, we've gone on from the sounds of the sea dish and worked with Chef Joseph Youssef, I mentioned earlier, from the Chef's Table, Gastrophysics Chef's Table in London. And here you can see the first course on the menu in High Barnet, a great restaurant, which when COVID is over, hopefully more of us will be able to get to. And this is a chef who's very interested in nudging diners towards eating different kinds of food, more healthy, more sustainable, fewer food miles. And in the first course on the menu, on the Gastrophysics Chef's Table, he wants to serve diners jellyfish. Jellyfish, a food that most diners in the West think, ugh, I don't think I like the sound of that. It might be something that people eat in parts of Asia, it certainly is. And yet jellyfish sounds jelly-ish and not really to many of our Western palates. Yet when you prepare it, jellyfish is anything but jelly-ish. It's really rather crunchy, has very little taste or flavour. It's mostly just a textural sound, the sound of crunch. And the chef is using here, you can see projection mapping onto the table in High Barnet, the sea where you might find the jellyfish. And jellyfish, I should say, are exploding in numbers, partly as a result of global warming. They're clogging up all sorts of power stations and things in the seas. And we really need to do something to reduce their number. So why not eat them, is one suggestion. Here we see the dish as served by the chef. Notice the jellyfish is wrapped around the tweezers. Here's a chef who's questioning everything about dining and why we bring food to our mouth with fork or spoon. Why not with tweezers or with a silver leaf or some other utensil? It comes with a cucumber gazpacho, you can see there. We have the projection mapping on the table. The diners will also put on their headphones for this course, and they'll hear both what you're about to hear now, which is the kind of the water, the waves, the ocean, where the jellyfish might have been floating before they made its way to your table. And if you listen, periodically you will hear the sound of crunch over the soundscape. And something very interesting happens here. So we've got both atmospheric sounds of the sea, but also the sounds of crunch, and that references some of my first work in food, our Ig Nobel Prize-winning research showing we could enhance the crunch of a Pringle by about 15% and its enjoyableness simply by boosting the sound that people heard. And here we're trying to draw attention, the diner's attention, to the crunch, the key sensory element of this food, and hopefully by curating their first experience of jellyfish, if they enjoy it in the restaurant, they'll be more likely to order it in the store or next time they're out and about. That is the hope, doing it through the senses. And something sort of very interesting happens here with this dish, which is as you have the headphones on and as you're crunching, sometimes you crunch and the headphones are silent. Sometimes the headphones crunch but you're not crunching, and sometimes you crunch at the same time that the headphones crunch. And your brain is kind of really intrigued by this as it tries to segregate and integrate. Was that me crunching or the headphones? And sometimes things come together, sometimes they come apart. So it's integration and segregation in a dish that kind of captures your attention. So there are chefs who are trying to use the power of the senses, the new gastrophysics, to nudge people towards different foods. But one question is, just how big an impact does the Provençal rosé paradox have? So far I've described it merely as an anecdote that's shared by many of us. And while we'd like to do many of these experiments around the impact of context, the sounds of the sea, in the restaurant itself, that's something a little bit more challenging in terms of the cost, the number of subjects one would need, and the fact that diners in the restaurant very often don't want to be experimented on. They just want to enjoy their meal. So to solve that problem, we've been doing a lot of work with brands around experiential, experimental, multisensory tasting. And we've done this with wines, with whiskies, with gins, with tea, with coffee, with fruit juices, with ice cream, with many, many different foods now, and many, many different brands over the last decade. And this was the first example for us from London from 2013, the Singleton Sensorium, where we had 500 people taken into a old gunmaker's studio in Soho in 2013. We gave them a glass of whiskey, a scorecard, a pencil, and then took them over a course of 15 minutes through the 3 environments you see on the right of the screen, starting with a grassy room at the top, with the sounds of the English summer, the deck chairs, the grass, the green lighting, the plants, the croquet hoops, and so on. And we had people rate the grassiness on the nose of the whiskey, the sweetness on the palate, and the texture of the aftertaste of the whiskey, how much they enjoyed the environment they were in, and how much they enjoyed the whiskey at that moment. They had made all those ratings first in the green room. They then took their drink downstairs to the room you see in the middle of the screen here, and they heard this soundscape, much more tinkling and high pitch. And this was a room designed to bring out sweetness. Everything is a colour of sweet, pinkish red. All the shapes you'll notice are round, because our research suggests sweet is round, and sweet is also tinkling and high pitch, hence the music that you hear. Again, they had to rate the nose, the taste, the texture, the interior decor, and their liking for the drink in this room. And finally, they went down to the woody room that you see at the bottom of the screen, and they had to rate the whiskey again, this time while listening to every kind of woody sound we could think of. The sounds of creaking wood doors, wood fire, wood instruments, you name it, everything woody, with wood on the walls, a dead tree behind where this picture was taken, and again the 5 ratings. And amazingly, after 3 nights and 500 people, what our results showed was that we could really bring out the grassiness on the nose of the whiskey by about 15% in the grassy room. Sweetness was enhanced by about 10% on the palate in the sweet room in the middle, and the woody textured aftertaste of the whiskey was enhanced most in the woody room at the bottom. That last room was the room that people most enjoyed their whiskey, and this was sort of published research. And what was striking to me was how some of those who came to the Singleton Sensorium experience, who could see their scorecards at the end of their 15 minutes and see that while the whiskey had not left their hands, their scores that they gave to that drink had changed as a function of the room, then went back to the restaurants, to their bars, and started serving whiskey drinks and cocktails off wooden trays in order to capture a bit of that experience, the one that they had enjoyed the whiskey most in. So this is really a version of the Provençal Rosé paradox captured in a multisensory tasting experience. And I think the effects we see here are reproduced in out there in some of those world-leading restaurants and bars now. But wherever we eat and wherever we drink, and whatever it is we eat and drink, we always eat in an environment, and that environment impacts us. Now, I mentioned a moment ago just that we played with the shapes in the room in the Singleton Sensorium. And that's one of the things that is sort of surprising and has come out of our research, which is that tastes and flavours of food and drink turn out to have shapes and colours and textures and sounds and timbres attached to them. It's almost kind of synesthetic. And perhaps the easiest way to demonstrate that for you is if you have your milk and dark chocolate handy, or if you don't have any milk or dark chocolate handy, if you can imagine the taste of milk and dark chocolate, something I'm sure that we can all do. If you either imagine or taste the milk chocolate first, and think about the scale you see on the top of the screen, and if you had to mark your experience of milk chocolate, would it be more towards the purple left booba shape, or would it be more angular like the star you see on the right of the screen? There are no right answers here, although there are consensual answers. If you just put a mark on that scale, virtual mark if you like, for milk chocolate. Now I'd like you to do the same for the dark chocolate, either tasting the Somerville chocolate if you have one, or imagining the taste of a bitter dark chocolate and think about where you would put a mark on the line. And I bet, and all it takes is 10 Nestle executives to show this normally significantly, I bet that you will, I don't know where exactly you'll have put the marks on the line, but I bet most of you put your bitter chocolate mark closer to the right hand side of the scale near the star, whereas the milk chocolate mark was closer to the booba, to the round blobby shape on the left. And what this shows, and we've done this now on hundreds, thousands of people in many different countries and from many different cultures, is that the majority think that sweet tastes are round, whereas bitter tastes are angular. We also associate tastes with colours, and we can use these associations, these almost synesthetic associations that have emerged from the research in order to design better foods and to nudge people towards healthier food behaviours. And here I'll just give you a couple of examples from the world of confectionery. One from the case of Cadbury's Dairy Milk. That changed its iconic shape for us Brits a few years ago from the angular shape you see on the top of the screen to the slightly rounder shape you see below. When they did this, they were able to shave off 3.9 grams or so of the weight, but keep the surface area apparently the same. But consumers wrote in, complained, phoned, said, "What have you done to our chocolate?" At least the readers of the Daily Mail did so. And what did they complain about? They complained specifically about Cadbury's changing the chocolate so it tasted sweeter and creamy. They said it tasted more sugary. Mystery is that the Mondelez International got back and said, "No, we haven't changed the formula for our chocolate at all. All we've done is change the shape." So it sort of makes no sense at all. Why would changing the shape of a chocolate change the taste of the chocolate? But it makes perfect sense if you know that sweet goes with round, that angular primes bitter. We were in print 2 years before this event happened, saying if you are a confectionery manufacturer and you want to reduce the sugar in your products but keep the taste experience the same, why not make your product rounder? Because roundness sets expectations of sweetness and hence can deliver some of the sweetness without the need for the actual sugar. Cadbury's changed the shape but didn't reduce the sugar content, and this was the result. So I think this offers one way in then to sort of nudging people's behaviour. For many food brands, they are reducing voluntarily or because they have to some of the unhealthy ingredients, the sugar, the salt, the fat. But when they do so, very often consumers complain that they're changing the taste of their favourite brands. But maybe there is scope to use colour, to use shape, and to use music more effectively to add some almost synesthetic sweetness. And when I see somebody like Roses in the press changing their chocolate and making it rounder, they probably won't talk about its impact on sweetness, because sugar is not a debate they necessarily want to have with the consumer. Yet nevertheless, one can see how they might be cleverly using the gastrophysics to enhance the sweet taste while reducing the sugar. At least they would do so if the sugar wasn't so cheap. So I said tastes have shapes. Sweet is round, bitter is angular, sour is angular and asymmetric. Tastes also have colours attached. And this is something we've been working on a lot with the food industry, trying to optimise the colour of the products that you buy in the supermarket, but also with chefs here, with Chef Joseph Youssef, from a dish on a synesthesia menu that was served in London a few years ago, where a number of the courses on the menu were actually experiments that we got to write up and analyse the data from. This dish was called the Four Tastes, and you can see the chef preparing the dish, the amuse-bouche, for service. It came to the table looking like this: 4 spoons of spherified liquid, so using molecular modernist techniques. And the chef would come out, would say, "This is a little amuse-bouche from the kitchen. It's called the Four Tastes." The wait staff would put down these 4 spoons in a random order before each diner, sitting around the same table. and they would be told the chef recommends that you start with the salty spoon, you then have the bitter spoon, next have the sour spoon, and end on a sweet note. Please now rearrange the spoons in front of you with salty spoon on the left, then the bitter, then the sour, then the sweet. And then the waitstaff would disappear and diners were left wondering, but I don't know what, he didn't tell us, she didn't tell us which taste was which colour. But that is the point of the dish, that diners have to use their intuition about the colour of taste to arrange the spoons. And because these gels are spherified, they have no smell and they have no taste until you explode one of these. It's almost like a grape in your mouth, and then you'll know whether in fact you've got the colour taste match right. Here on the screen they're kind of arranged in the right order. Majority of people think that salty is white, that browny black is bitter, that green is sour, and that red is sweet. If you get it right, you'll have a very nice taste experience. If you get it wrong, so-called wrong, then you'll probably be pulling the Marmite face if you expected sweet and got salty. It will stay in your memory if nothing else. But hopefully leave diners thinking about the associations between colours and tastes, colours and shapes, and how they might be used for entertainment in this case, but also for nudging people towards healthier foods. Because it turns out if I'm trying to sell you a yogurt, then if I colour it a pinkish red colour, the colour of sweetness, then people will rate it as tasting significantly sweeter, even though I've added no more sugar. And from the food itself, we've gone on to work on the colour of the plateware, the colour of the packaging, and I think that's really important and also really surprising. Here, working with Ferran Adria's test kitchen, the Alicia Foundation in Spain, we serve this dish which looks like a strawberry ice cream. And in this case, it more or less is a strawberry mousse. And we served it to diners off the black plate and then off the white plate, or vice versa. 67 people or thereabouts had to rate how sweet, how flavourful, and how intense the flavour and taste of this mousse was. The mousse was the same, the people were the same, the place was the same. All that changed was the colour of the plate that they tasted the food from. And yet, bizarrely, and this was published in 2012 with the Alicia Foundation, people said that the mousse served on the white plate tasted about 12% more flavourful, 13% more intense, and about 7% sweeter. So while you can't literally taste the plate, the colour of the plate on which food is served can nevertheless alter the taste somehow. In 2012, we didn't really realise what was going on, whether this could really be true, but 9 years later now, there have been many published studies from around the world all showing that yes, the shape and the colour of plates can influence the taste of food. And while this doesn't matter so much to a world-leading chef serving you a once-in-a-lifetime meal, who cares about a teaspoon of sugar here or there? If one is a food producer, perhaps selling, 1 million yogurts pots a day, or lunch packs, the packaging is very often the same thing as the plate. We eat direct from the packaging, say, very often when we eat a yogurt. And how many people have thought so far about whether they could enhance the sweetness, enhance the liked tastes without the unhealthy ingredients, simply by optimizing the design, the colour, the shape of the packaging. That is something that the food industry is now starting to take notice of and modify the shapes of the packaging and its colour of the foods we buy in store, based on the research that emerged from collaboration with the top chefs and the scientists such as myself. And what's true of ice cream is true across the board. I mentioned in passing here one example. We've been doing a lot of work in coffee, and here with my colleague Fabiana Cavallo from Brazil, we've been testing Q graders, coffee roasters, baristas from around the world, getting them to rate coffees served from cups of different shapes, of different textures, of different colours as we see here. And the amazing thing is, when you change the colour of the cup, it changes the taste of the coffee. Shouldn't do, but it does. In part because as soon as you see one of those 4 cups you can see on the screen now, it sets expectations about taste that maybe then, if I see the yellow cup and I expect a sour tasting drink, I'm more likely to experience that. Now, these effects depend a bit on the bean that you use and on your particular taste profile. Some of us like an acidic coffee, others don't. We prefer chocolate and other caramel notes in our coffee. But the basic point is the same, that the cup in which you serve the coffee changes the taste experience, and it can be used to enhance the experience depending on what you like and what you have been served. And for so long, I mean, there are more than 1 billion cups of coffee are served every day or somewhere around the world, and more than 400 billion per year. And while there's been huge amounts of research on the coffee bean, the roasting, the fermentation and so on, virtually no one has ever studied scientifically the impact of the coffee cup. But every drink of coffee came from a cup or a can or a mug, and those cans, cups and mugs always influence the experience. And so there's a real opportunity here, I think, to enhance design. And that's something that's in our work. We both analyse the impact of already existing plateware, but also then feed in to work with designers and plateware manufacturers. Here in a project with Reiko Kaneko, a Japanese potter from the Midlands who makes some of the plateware for the Fat Duck restaurant. And she took the gastrophysics research from the lab here in Oxford, or from the lab there in Oxford, I should say, given I'm in Colombia, and created these plates designed to enhance the taste of the food. And this is really exciting to me to see how designers are coming together with the scientists and the creators of the kitchen to make futuristic plateware and cutlery that can enhance the taste of the food. The round pink dessert bowl you see in the top, designed to bring out sweetness, and the textured, gritty, sandpapery, heavy plate at the bottom, designed to bring out the gingeriness in a Thai green curry, a seafood plate on the right. And this is really a whole new world. So long we haven't really thought about the plate, we've only thought about what's on the plate, and yet the plateware, the cutlery are a key part of the experience. They can be studied, they can be optimized, and they can be used to nudge us towards better foods. And of course, once we've decided what plate we're going to use, if there is a plate at all, then we might think about the plating of the food and build on kind of the gastrophysics or the gastroporn research, showing that there is nothing that gets our brains more excited than the sight of our favourite food when we're hungry. The brain, the body's most bloodthirsty organ, and it's that anticipation of our favourite meal that really gets the brain going like nothing else. Real pornography doesn't do it. Gastroporn does. In this study from Wang and colleagues in 2004 from NeuroImage, leading to about a 25% increase in cerebral blood flow. Remarkable increase, much bigger than you see for anything else. But that leaves a question of how much does the visual appearance of the food really matter to the taste? Do we really first eat with our eyes, as Apicius once said? And this is where Somerville comes in particular, where we tested this dish, a dish from a Franco-Colombian chef, Charles Michel, based on one of Kandinsky's paintings you can see on the right here. Kandinsky, a synesthetic artist. And when the chef saw this painting hanging in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the caption was talking about how Kandinsky tried to communicate emotion through colour and form. And the chef thought, well, I'm kind of an artist too. And that's what I want to do. I want to communicate emotion, not just nutrition, to my guests. And he was inspired to create this Kandinsky salad, healthy ingredients, 31 elements altogether, combined on the plate. But does it really taste better just because it looks good? That was a question we first tested at home in Kingston Road, where I live, with the chef you see here, Charles Michel. 12 Kandinsky salads to go, eaten with a paintbrush, because you are eating a painting after all, and eaten from a painting canvas, again, because you're eating a painting. It seemed to work there, and then we took the dish made by the chef and paid our participants in the lab, and then tested in Somerville College dining hall the 2 platings you see here at a parents' lunch back in 2015, I believe. Half the parents and their offspring got to eat the tossed salad on the right. The other half got the Kandinsky-inspired dish on the left. And you can hopefully see from the difference in the willingness to pay at the bottom of the screen that for exactly the same food, plating it beautifully led to a doubling in the willingness to pay for the same food. So to the extent we should all be eating more healthy, leafy greens, then maybe gastroporn is the way in. working together with the creators of the kitchen and the analytic techniques of the gastrophysics and the psychological science, we can optimize plate design and deliver some really delicious dishes. I just want to finish up, though, thinking about some of the other dishes that have emerged since the Kandinsky salad that really highlight the interplay between the psychology, the gastrophysics, and the culinary arts. And there's one based on this picture you see here, which appears in pretty much every psychology perception textbook for decades. It looks like noise, it looks like nothing at all, but if you stare at it long enough, then eventually you should see that what the picture shows is really a Dalmatian dog sniffing the leaves in a park. Its head is in the middle of the screen pointing to the left, its tail is on the right hand side of the screen. And once you see this dog, you see it in an instant. So from noise comes an image. There's this kind of emergence, the psychologists call it. And once you've seen the dog in the leaves, even if you don't see this picture again for another 50 years, you cannot unsee it. Something has changed. It's almost like a paradigm shift. Something's changed in your brain, and you'll see it again immediately thereafter. I showed this dish to the chef at Kitchen Theory and said, could we make an edible illusion? The chef thought about it, went away for a couple of months, as he does, and then came back with this dish you see here, the Picasso dish. It was served to 100 diners in London, and again has a message around nudging our food behaviour towards something more sustainable. Before the dish comes to the table, the chef would come out from the kitchen and he would say, Picasso said lots of things that were interesting. One of which this artist said was that every act of creation begins with an act of destruction. And to me, as a chef come artist, says Joseph Youssef, that sort of resonates, because to make this beautiful dish I'm about to serve you, I also need to take beautiful natural ingredients and destroy them, chop them, dice them, smash them, boil them, you name it. Destroy them in order to create beautiful dish that you see now, and you in turn will destroy my creation in order to enjoy the flavours therein. But before I give you the dish, I've just got to go back to the kitchen and catch your dinner. He leaves, stage left, and diners then hear this soundscape you're hearing now, the final moments of the duck. This is kind of a version of the Sound of the Sea dish, but one which doesn't have such a happy ending. Ends with a whack as the duck's life is finished. And diners in the restaurant are going, what? They sort of giggle, they're a bit uncomfortable. But that's kind of the whole point, is that if you do not wish to know where your meat came from and what happened to it on its way to the table, do you really want to eat it? So we're trying to nudge diners to think a little bit more carefully about the meat they eat and the animal protein, and to savour it if they choose to eat it at all. Then the dish comes out from the kitchens. It looks like you see here, and the chef will say, well, can you see anything in your plate? It's a beautiful bit of gastroporn, but is there an image there? Or is it just noise? Only 4 of the 100 diners in the restaurant in London where this was served could see that Picasso's half face is staring out from the screen. If I cover up the left side of the plate with some duck and some micro herbs and beetroot and reflect the right hand side, hopefully you can see that what you have here is Picasso's bald head staring out from the plate. And after a few minutes, 96 of 100 diners could see Picasso staring out from the plate. And once you've seen Picasso, you can never unsee him. If you ever see this bit of gastroporn again, you'll immediately see Picasso. But until you have seen it, you really can't see anything at all. And it's hard to know, once you've seen Picasso, how others could not see him. So it's kind of interesting. It has an aesthetic aha component, but also a message about sustainability of foods that was served in the restaurant, with beautiful to look at plating, the gastroporn, but also the sonic element as well. The final example I'll give is from another illusion from the textbooks, the duck-rabbit illusion, popularized by Jastrow in the 1890s, when scientists from a century ago or more were interested in popularizing science. It's an image that looks like a duck or that looks like a rabbit. I showed it to the chef. He went away, thought about it, realised that rabbits are pretty sustainable as things go, that duck and rabbit go together very well in terrines from a culinary perspective, and he then made a dish. Here you can see the dish, or the first version of the dish, the duck-rabbit dish, made from both duck and rabbit, with an image that can be seen as either a duck or a rabbit. And we took this early version of the dish from the chef, put it online, and had 1,000 people say what did they see in the plate. And our aim was to find the perfect orientation of the dish such that half the diners would say duck, half would say rabbit, and that would create discussion at the dining table. What do you mean you see a duck? I see a rabbit. No, the beak is the ears, and so it goes on. So we used the gastrophysics research to optimize the plating of this dish, which was then brought to the table as you see it here. Note the plate, specially created with a handle at the top so you can tilt the plate to prioritize either the image of a duck or of a rabbit. When this dish came to the table, our question was, if you see a duck, does it taste like duck? And if you see a rabbit, does it taste like rabbit? And then as your visual perception flips back and forth, if you see a duck, do you taste duck? And then you see rabbit, do you taste rabbit? So if so, we'd have the world's first flavour-changing dish. If not, that tells me, the psychologist, something interesting, that our visual perception flips more rapidly than our taste or flavour perception does. The dish came, looking as you see it here, it also came with a soundscape, which you can hopefully hear now. Looney Tunes, duck, rabbit, it's duck season, it's rabbit season. So what you hear is alternating back and forth between duck and rabbit. We use projection mapping on the table again, as you see here. And this is probably, hopefully, then also triggering nostalgia, something that was also triggered by the sound of the sea. So once again, we've got a message here about nudging diners toward different food choices, to more sustainable rabbit, but doing so through gastrophysics, doing so through the use of sound, and doing so through the use of technology and projection to trigger nostalgia and positive emotion. With diners in the restaurant at the table filling in a questionnaire to see what did they see, what did they taste, and did one change when the other changed or not. I'll just leave you with one of the other areas that's very important to us currently, and we'll link in to the performance from the choir after I finish in a few minutes, all around the world of sonic seasoning, how exactly it is that what we hear, be it the sounds of the sea, be it the singing of fish and chips, or be it more abstract musical elements, can also change the taste of food, just like colour and just like shape. And this was something we worked on first with the Fat Duck restaurant and the House of Wolf restaurant in London, with sound design agency Condiment Junkie, and with a culinary artist, Caroline Hopkinson, serving this 5-course tasting menu in London. And the key thing is the sound dish at the bottom of the menu you can see on the screen here, the Sonic Cake Pop. Please take out your phone, dial 0845 680 2419. So here we're moving from the technology of the Top Chef with the sound of the sea dish hidden away in the conch shell to the ubiquitous technology in each and every one of our pockets, and trying to use it in order to enhance the taste of the food. Playing sweet music to bring out a sweet taste, using bitter music to bring out a bitter taste as well. Seasoning the dish through sound. This is sonic seasoning to your taste. Could it be true? Here we see a diner in the restaurant, and you can hopefully hear they're eating a bittersweet chocolate lolly. They're using their mobile technology to listen to one track, which could be sweet or it could be bitter. And now I'll play the other track for you. And you might think, is this one the sweet or the bitter one? Now, the majority of people, about 900 out of 1,000, will say the second track was a sweeter one, more tinkling and high pitch, tends to sound sweeter to people. and we've shown in the lab and in the restaurant, and now with thousands of people at food festivals, design festivals around the world, from Korea to Japan to Belgium to North America and India, that sonic seasoning works. If we play sweet music, we can bring out the sweet tastes. And this insight too, that again comes from the psychology, comes from the gastrophysics, comes from basic understanding of the human senses, is then being used in cafes like this one, the Jin Cafe in Beijing, who are playing the music you can hear now, which is the world's sweetest music ever created. And we've been able to test that at the Science Museum in London. And they play this sweet music when people order drinks, the idea being that they can reduce the sugar in their drinks and pastries, but keep the taste experience the same by having sweet music to intelligently add some sonic sweetness without the calories. One might think, who would not want that? I've got lots more. I've got spicy music, I've got creamy music, I've got all sorts of music that has been developed now between the science lab, the chefs, the food and beverage brands, the sound designers, the composers. I'll just give you this one, which is the world's sourest music, with a sour colour, green, with a sour shape, asymmetric and pointy, and with some sour, mathematically transformed Argentinian tango from Bruno Mez. Put them all together, and if you're tasting a glass of white wine or a yogurt or a children's Sour Patch candy, very sour sweet, you can see people's face contorting with the sourness that's being delivered through the sound, the visuals here, hinting at the power of sonic seasoning to modify our taste experience. Not in a good way in this case, but certainly effectively. Now I was going to leave you with some of the uses for this kind of research out in the real world. Here I am in the garden on my sabbatical, fortunately, in Colombia, and my wife, out of shot now, she loves these. These are big-assed Colombian Amazonian flying ants, Omegas colonas. And from what we saw at the beginning of the talk, if we know that seafood is easier to sell when we call it Chilean sea bass than Patagonian toothfish, and that vegetarian products are probably easier to call burgers than they are discs, and sausages than they are tubes, then a big-assed flying ant probably doesn't have a name that really resonates with the public. And yet these are highly protein-rich element, snack food primarily, but one which could have a potential future. This and other insects in our diet. But from what we've seen, I probably want to change the name from big-assed ants to something else a little more appealing if we're hoping to get consumers to try them and integrate them into their diet. And that's one area currently we're working with people around the world on what are the names, the situations, the packages, the branding that will help people to shift towards a more insect-forward diet, shall we say, and helps hopefully save the planet a little. Another direction is taking the insights and applying them to the elderly, to the growing number of people who are living and eating alone. And as more of us live past 60 or 70 years of age, that is the time when we start to see a loss of smell and of taste. And I was very struck in my own mother's case when she died from Alzheimer's a couple of years ago, how in her final months the only thing she would eat was ice cream. She never liked ice cream in the rest of her life, but for the final few months, ice cream was the thing that she was drawn to. And I can't help wondering if that's because when you lose your sense of taste, when you lose your sense of smell, she was 80-something, maybe all you have left to enjoy in food is the temperature, the coolness of ice cream. And hence, with that thought in mind, and there are a number of other examples where ice cream is the go-to food for those who've lost their teeth or who've lost smell or taste. We've been working with the chef, Joseph Youssef, and Denville Hall, a home for aged actors, and creating a menu of healthy ice creams built on Huel, and using the latest in molecular technologies so we don't have to add the cream, but to deliver great tasting ice creams that are nutritious to some of the residents of the care home you see here, using projections, nostalgic projections. We had a cream of tomato, Heinz tomato soup ice cream. We had a prawn cocktail ice cream, and so it went on. We have projections to identify the flavours. We were playing Vera Lynn's music to sort of set the scene historically to trigger nostalgia, using many of the same approaches that we've used in the high-end restaurant here with this population. And then again, when we served that cream of tomato soup ice cream, we ran into the problem I started with of the ice cream that looked pink but tasted savoury. Again, none of us have probably had cream of tomato soup ice cream before. It's lovely, delicious, it's healthy, but there's this danger of disconfirmed expectations, so we have to think very carefully about the naming as well. I will therefore leave it there, but hopefully giving you a sense of how I think at least the emerging gastrophysics, the new science of the senses, is being advanced through work with some of the world's most creative chefs and restaurants and food and beverage brands. But the insights that are uncovered from the basic research done in the laboratory or out in the wild, in the real world, in the restaurants, in the bars, in the cafes, in the festivals, can then be taken and to provide insights into how we may nudge all of us to selecting healthier foods both for us and more sustainable foods for our planet through hacking the senses, and how for the years ahead we're not just thinking on a sort of worldwide scale, we're also going interplanetary, shall we say, and working with the European Space Agency in order to think about how to optimize the gastrophysics of food in space, be it for the astronauts on the long-haul flight to Mars and back, or be it for the world's first residents of the world's first space hotel, which may only be a few years away. The commercialization of space, in both cases there are problems around nutrition, about food, around the fact that so many of our astronauts currently do not eat sufficient nutrition to maintain their weight in space. It doesn't matter for a short trip round to the moon and back, but when you're thinking about years of travel to Mars and back, there's some very serious problems there that I believe that gastrophysics, together with a number of other sciences, can hopefully help to resolve. And with that, I will finish, but I'm happy, more than happy, to take any questions, and I do look forward to hearing the choir's rendition of fish and chips in a moment. Thank you.
When it comes to healthy eating and the joy of keeping fit, there's a bite that takes some beating for the fashion-conscious Brit. It's considered staple diet over many English hearts, and every night they fry it all around the British Isles. Fish and chips, fish and chips, what a wonderful taste on the lips. Fish and chips, guaranteed for swimming the hips. After 2 or 3 pints of your local best bitter, there's nothing and chips. Now you'll never taste potatoes like the ones at our Chip Chippy.
French fries don't have the status. What we like is more drippy.
When you eat them with your fingers, with your nose right in the vapor, oh, it lingers and it mingles with the newsprint on the paper. Fish and chips, fish and chips, what a wonderful taste on the lips. Fish and chips, guaranteed for swinging the hips. After 2 or 3 pints of your local best bitter, there's nothing as good and there's nothing to better. A fresh Highland fillet that's deep fried in butter with chips, chips, chips. There's a frill that always grips you when you're standing in the queue.
And your sweat of fish and chips you will forevermore be true.
For they bring you close to heaven, the eternal, the sublime. Hey, they're closing at 11. Let's go round the second time. Fish and chips, fish and chips, fish and chips, fish and chips.
What a wonderful taste
Wonderful taste on the lips.
The best are in Leicester, Loughborough and Lutterworth.
And Thurcaston, Thurmaston, Thurlaston, Fettingworth,
And Melton and Houghton and Belton and Stoughton.
and Rothley and Reesby, and Chelmsford and Chisby,
Not bad in Colville and Old Ashley Fortville.
Kilby and Kilworth, and Kegworth and Kibworth,
And Wigston and Nordby and Gumley and Goldby.
and Ansby and Nelston, Neston and Nelson.
Holycourt, Harborough, and Milborne and Narborough, Stony Sutton and Alton and Melton, Hatham and Statham, Knaptoft and Strattoft and Scats are freely in BB. If not Orford, then Oxford, with your chips, fish and chips, fish and chips.